Yes.
So that's something, since we are on a law subject today, we
Yeah.
can kind of put it across probably in as simple a manner as possible.
Exactly, sir. That's the aim. Sorry, I'm just figuring this out. It's loading quite a bit. I'm just, it's still saying it's setting up the preview. That's why.
So people are in the waiting room, right?
No, it'll go straight online on Facebook. So then they'll get a notification and they'll come.
Oh,
Usually,
acha.
yeah,
Okay,
Zoom is very helpful that way.
good, good, good.
um,
Yeah, Zoom. I've tried Zoom, Teams, and Hangouts.
yes,
Zoom is quite user friendly.
I know, sir. 1 second, I'm just checking. Yes. Okay, sir. So we've started our live, but I'm just trying to. Um, 1 second. Yeah. All right, sir. So let me just double check if we're live, and then we'll start.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're live now, and a lot of people have already started joining. Once again, my name is Malavika Rajkumar. I'm the content lead of Nyaya. Today we have with us Praveen Bhargava, expert that we've been very excited to have on the talk for some time now. Sir is actually the trustee of the Wildlife First and has been involved in wildlife conservation since 1982. He's also been a former member of the National Board of Wildlife, and he has conducted several training programs for police officials, forest officers, and even judiciary. And he's also been part of a subcommittee on the amendment to the Wildlife Protection Act, and a recipient of the Sanctuary Wildlife Service Award. And so, too many accolades to mention right now, but we're very excited to have you on board. The topic of discussion today is protection of wildlife, and specifically we'll look at it from a legal point of view. But if you have any questions, please feel free to ask our expert. And let me just give a short introduction on what the law for wildlife is for many of our users who are not familiar with it. To summarize in 1 or 2 lines, the wildlife law in India is known as the Wildlife Protection Act, 1972. The main objective of the act is to protect wildlife. It also deals with poaching. It also looks into creation of authorities for protection of wildlife, and also protection of illegal trade in wildlife. So, starting on this note, let's look at the first question to Sir. What does wildlife include?
Thanks. Hello, everybody. Wildlife is a term which is defined in the Act. It includes wild animals. Wild animals itself are those species that are listed for. And wild animals includes birds, reptiles, mammals, amphibians, insects, and everything, all animals. So that's the all-encompassing term. So wild animals, habitat, land, vegetation, all this comes under the definition of wildlife. It's defined in the Wildlife Act in the definition sections at 2 subsection 37. I don't want to get technical because I don't want to bamboozle our audience with too many technical terminologies. Let's keep it simple. So the wildlife is a defined term, and it includes wild animals, land, vegetation. Land means habitat of the wild animal, all kinds of vegetation that's found in the habitat. So this is the definition of wildlife.
Yes. And on that note, and especially on World Environment Day today, wildlife is also an aspect that's discussed widely, mainly because of the unfortunate incident that also happened a few days back with the elephant down in Kerala. So, keeping in mind that note, like I think a lot of our users want to understand who are the designated officials or authorities in India for wildlife protection?
Okay. Now there are both statutory bodies that are to be constituted under the law, and there are designated authorities as well. So if you look at the statutory bodies that function under the ambit of the Wildlife Protection Act, the highest statutory body under the Act is the National Board for Wildlife. This is chaired by the Prime Minister of India. And there is a standing committee constituted by the National Board, which is a smaller subset of the National Board for Wildlife, which is chaired by the Union Environment Minister. And there are 10 members on the standing committee. There are 47 members on the National Board for Wildlife. Now, other than this, at the national level, there is the National Conservation Authority, which is exclusively looking into aspects of the tigers and its habitats. Then we have the Wildlife Crime Control Bureau, which is a specialized body to look into aspects concerning implementation of the CITES Accord, which is an international convention to protect wild animals from trade related issues. And we have the State Board for Wildlife, which are bodies constituted under the Act again, but at the state level. And the State Board for Wildlife is headed by the Chief Minister of the state. We also have what is called as the Central Zoo Authority. We're not getting into aspects pertaining to zoo as wildlife. But also a state zoo authority. So these are the bodies constituted under the Wildlife Act. Now, in terms of the officers or officials, at the central government level is the Director of Wildlife Preservation, Government of India. And at the state government level, it is the Chief Wildlife Warden. These two are extremely important functionaries. The Director of Wildlife Preservation is also the member of the National Board for Wildlife. The Chief Wildlife Warden is the member secretary of the State Board for Wildlife.
Voice is being cut off. Could you just...
Cut off? Okay. Is it clear now?
It's much better now.
Yeah. So the Chief Wildlife Wardens are member secretaries of the State Board for Wildlife. So these two at the state level, the Chief Wildlife Warden Supreme, and under the Chief Wildlife Warden, you have what are called as authorized officers who could be park wardens who are leading the field formations at the national park or tiger reserve level. One must point out that the police also have concurrent jurisdiction under the Wildlife Act. They have all the powers and they can tackle any issue pertaining to hunting or illegal trade, because a lot of illegal trade moves through towns and cities and so on. And therefore, without the police monitoring it, it will be difficult, because the forest department does not have that kind of presence and reach in large cities. So the police are also reach. So this is broadly the structure. And it's a very conceived structure. There's nothing wrong with it. Yes, there are gaps in implementation.
Okay, sir. So keeping in mind the framework that you have discussed right now, let's go into the issue of wildlife reserves. So as per the National Wildlife Database, there are around 682 protected areas all around India, 102 national parks, 520 wildlife sanctuaries, 56 conservation sites, and 4 community reserves. So specifically, when we look at wildlife reserves, which is the topic of the day, what are the threats that wildlife reserves face and the solutions to tackle them?
Yeah, very good. So this is important because the Wildlife Act is also about notification of these national park sanctuaries, and tiger reserves. I try to simply put across the difference that a tiger reserve in the country today is also either a national park or a sanctuary, because the core critical tiger habitats have been constituted with an overlapping notification. It was a sanctuary or national park. The difference between a sanctuary and a national park, it's very simple. The first is that in a national park, there cannot be any livestock grazing. It is prohibited. Whereas in a sanctuary, in a certain designated area, vaccinated livestock can be allowed. In a sanctuary, certain rights can be allowed if there are existing settlements in a sanctuary. In a national park, all rights have to be settled. The third is a sanctuary can be upgraded to a national park, but a national park can't be downgraded to a sanctuary. Other than these three differences, broad differences, both have equal status. Now coming to the question of rights, I would say I would put three threats I would like to highlight.
I think the internet connection went again. I think we missed out 10 seconds.
Okay, is it clear now?
Yeah, it's better now. Yeah.
Okay, there are three important threats that we must recognize. The first and most critical threat is hunting and illegal trade. And your viewers may be interested to know that the illegal international trade in wildlife is second only to narcotics. The Interpol has estimated that it is about $20 billion. So there is some misconception and debate in academic circles that, oh, we don't need the guns and guards approach. We should hand over all these national parks and sanctuaries to Gram Sabhas and they can Gram Sabhas, but they can't take on these organized mafias which are operating, and this trade is a very real threat. So we need to address this threat very, very strongly. And the only thing that can take care of this threat to a certain extent is strong law enforcement. And how does this happen? Now, it's also like the objective must be to prevent crime, because a prime tusker, adult bull elephant, or a prime breeding tigress is very, very crucial in the population structure. So if hunters go and eliminate those animals, it will have cascading impacts. So therefore, prevention of wildlife crime assumes great importance. And for this, the solution is a multi-tiered protection system comprising patrols, well-connected network of poaching camps, and checkposts along all public highways that to national parks and let me tell all of us that it may, again, the audio is not correct.
Sometimes I think it's a network connectivity.
Yeah, I know. So the thing is that
it becomes quite clear and then it fades out. Maybe if you spoke slower, then it would not be an issue with the internet.
Okay. So foot patrols, I emphasize on this as a solution to protect our national parks. This is because it may sound as if it's a very low-tech intervention. Please be aware that America, all its latest equipment, drones, Predator missiles, what have you, lost the war on terror in Afghanistan. And Taliban had very rudimentary weapons, so it is not weapons that protect our national parks. Foot patrolling, unfortunately, is not very much, what shall I say, people talk of drones, that. No. Foot patrols is the most important aspect of protection and prevention of wildlife crime, because The hunters in national parks, not in vehicles. They enter on foot. They use it way deep within the forest. And only a foot patrol can detect such intrusions. And the other important aspect about foot patrolling and protection in general is that, as I said earlier, it is equipped with leadership. Because the stuff frontline again.
Yeah. Maybe, sir, if you could just switch off audio and then switch it on again and see what happens.
No, it looks okay here. Is it better now?
It's better now. Every
I
time
know
it becomes better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's see.
Yeah.
Let me switch on another line also.
Yes. No problem.
So the leadership, quality leadership is absolutely essential. More equipment, guns, whatever. So because the frontline protection staff of forest departments come from a lower strata of the society. So they need good leadership to back them up, and then they can do wonders. The next is mobile patrolling, and these are armed patrols. Then you have a network of camps deep inside these national parks and sanctuaries, typically about 3 camps per 100 square kilometers. This is what is the recommended level of protection. If parks have this kind of protection and officers, senior officers are involved in field level monitoring, and they provide quality leadership to their field formations, parks are protected to a large extent. Yet no park can be protected, or the hunting rates can be brought down to zero, because crime will happen. There is a criminal element in society which can be stopped only by force. And therefore, when it can't be prevented despite good efforts, you need to detect crime and prosecute the offenders. So one solution is very good network of protection, the multi-tiered protection system. The next threat that parks face, and this is again, your viewers may be a little confused about this, let me clarify. There are people deep inside these national parks and sanctuaries. This is a reality. Now, some of the good parks also have about 10 people per square kilometer. Now, this is completely unsustainable, though there is a general understanding that people and wildlife harmoniously coexist. It is not, in reality, they don't, including the one in Kerala that we saw. This was a conflict between human interests and the interests of wildlife. The solution to this is not anti-people, it's a win-win solution for both people and wildlife, which is that you offer a voluntary settlement. And each family gets 10 rupees, 3 acres of land, and various other benefits under various schemes of the central government.
Sorry, sir. I think
Again,
10 seconds. Yeah.
let me change my connection just one second.
Yes, sir. No problem. Yeah.
Sorry about this.
Okay. The perils of internet live streaming, sir. No problem.
Okay, is it clear now? Is it better?
Yes, sir. Much better. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Oops, there was a power outage. Okay, is it better now?
Yes. All good, sir. Yeah.
Okay. So the next threat is about people living inside protected areas. So 10 people per square kilometer is used. For example, most of our parks, the size is about 600, 500, 600 square kilometers. 600 square kilometers, 60 tigers, 6,000 people, and 600 elephants. is an equation that is just not sustainable. We need to look at it pragmatically, and the solution to this is a good incentive-driven, site-specific package of voluntary resettlements. This is being offered by the government. The process is being very slow. There is enough money. Let not anybody take back this short of funds. We have 8,000 crore fund under which the ministry, again the audio.
Yes, sir. So why don't we do something, sir? Why don't switch off our videos so that the information itself goes out for some time and then come back in again?
I'll switch.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah. The audio is clear now, sir. I'll let you know.
Okay. Okay. So the thing is that we have enough funds for voluntary resettlement. So the solution is a win-win solution which works both for people and wildlife, and we need to implement this because that is considered as one of the most serious threats for conservation. This to resolve conflicts, including the pineapple baited explosive issue that we saw in Kerala recently. That's just a small example of how conflicts play out on the ground. And people are also affected very badly because of wildlife depredations and so forth. So we need to resolve this, and the solution is voluntary resettlement. That's a very serious aspect. Development projects into sanctuaries. Unfortunately,
sorry, sir. 10 seconds there. Could you repeat?
Yeah. The next threat is development projects, which are intruding into our national parks and sanctuaries. Now, this is a very serious threat because though the Wildlife Protection Act has a clear procedure to follow, and clearance for such projects must be the exception, not the rule. Unfortunately, what has happened is that currently the clearance rate is about 99%. And what these development projects are doing, see, we are not against development. If I were to illustrate this in a simple, with a simple piece of data, 96% of India is being used by humans. 4% of India is reserved for wildlife in the form of national parks and sanctuaries. If India has not been able to resolve its economic development issues and deliver social justice to people using 96%, will the last 4% being destroyed for development make any dent on the issue? No. We would have lost some of our best areas where our rivers originate, some exceedingly important biodiversity sites. Let me point out here, there is this myth of compensatory afforestation. Oh, I'll take 5 hectares of land inside the forest. I'll put 10 hectares outside. Nothing can be so untrue. The remedy is worse than the malady. So we need to in situ protect national parks and sanctuaries from the intrusion of development projects. There are powerful solutions to address this, because 30 years of the best science in landscape ecology is telling us that fragmentation due to development projects or settlements, etc., is the most serious threat. We need to design highways, we need to projects, and only site-specific projects that cannot be shifted. For example, probably some ore that is found and which is of national importance, or some other project which is completely justified. And we need to allow only those things, and we need to compensate by adding additional areas if areas is inevitable. action is inevitable. So therefore, there are many highways, railway lines, power lines. These are called as linear intrusions. These linear intrusions must be redesigned. I'll just give you a small example and close this point.
Yes.
Our present highways were footpaths 100 years ago. They turned into cart tracks, became jeep tracks over a period of time. That need not be the alignment of your 4-lane highway that you want today. We need to just like in Delhi or Bangalore or wherever, we are spending hundreds of crores or thousands of crores for creating bypasses. We need to bypass all 15 of us.
Yeah.
Is it clear now?
Yeah.
All 15 of us or non-official members presented this, and the then Prime Minister accepted this solution. And in fact, today there is a moratorium on construction of new roads in national. There are other solutions where you can't change the alignment. You will have to build an overpass, an underpass, and other artifacts to ensure that wildlife moves on the ground, the vehicles go up. Other cables can be if that alignment is inevitable. So these are the issues that solutions that can be to ensure that these are different or maybe
on that. So actually what's happening is sometimes the audio is going at very critical moments. So I'll definitely do one thing, like the questions again definitely cover a lot of the areas in depth, so you'll be able to explain that again, but
okay.
So sorry, I'll interrupt you if there's ever an issue, and then you'll just
Please do that, because my signals are showing full strength. I don't know what is happening.
It happens. All right. So taking forward the discussion on protection of wildlife reserves, one of the main threats that exists today is hunting and poaching. And sir, specifically, you've written a book on wildlife law for rangers, and I'm sure this is one of the areas that you've looked at deeply. So sir, is hunting or sporting, is hunting or poaching illegal in India, and to what extent?
Absolutely, it's completely illegal. And let me inform your viewers that poaching is a term that doesn't exist in the law. The term is hunting. We normally, there is a misconception even amongst law enforcement officers that hunting is only killing of small, like wild pig and deer and so forth, but poaching is about killing of tigers and elephants for tusks and ivory and so forth. No, the term used is hunting in the law. The term poaching doesn't exist in the law. It is absolutely illegal for any person to hunt any wild animal listed in Schedule 1, Schedule 4 of Wildlife Protection. Yeah. It is absolutely illegal for any person to hunt any animal listed in Schedule 1 to Schedule 4 of. And let me also point out that the term hunting includes attempt to hunt, the attempt to do so. And it can be by any method. It can be by shooting, it can be by snaring. And the issue that happened in Kerala last week was, it is called as a baited explosive. The explosive has been put inside a pineapple, and they use different kinds of baited explosives to kill animals.
Yeah.
All these are covered in the definition of a weapon. Explosives, guns, snares, traps, everything is included. And hunting includes even an attempt to hunt. And even mere possession of a snake, for example, is an offense.
Hmm.
You can be arrested and you can be prosecuted if that snake or reptile is in Schedule 1 or Part 2 of Schedule 2. Potentially, you face an imprisonment term of up to 7 years in prison. So therefore, please be aware that you cannot possess any wild animal, you cannot hunt, and this restriction is not limited only to sanctuaries and national parks. If, for example, I'm giving an absurd example, if a tiger enters New Delhi and enters the Parliament House, nobody can kill it. The Chief Wildlife Warden of Delhi only has the power to order the killing of a wild animal if it has become a the police open fire and kill. Okay, the police can't open fire and kill an animal. They will have to get orders from the Chief Wildlife Warden in case of a Schedule 1 animal like tigers and elephants, leopards, and so forth. In case of other animals, authorized officers, as I mentioned, there are authorized officers like park wardens and so forth. They can issue orders with respect to other animals in other schedules. For example, there was this major incident in Maharashtra last year of this tigress called Avni.
Yes.
And there was a big debate on this. I wrote a piece in The Wire also on this. And we need to make a very clear distinction between these large animals which are dangerous to humans. And they come into conflict.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. When these large dangerous animals come into conflict with humans, you need to act decisively. At this point, wildlife conservation and animal rights part ways. Animal rights it's a very legitimate and important issue, and I'm all for that. But the simple point where we differ is that wildlife conservation is all about saving the species as a whole in its natural habitat. And if in an inevitable situation where one individual animal unfortunately has to be removed to protect the larger interests of the saving the species and not losing public support, wildlife conservationists do recommend it, but after proper scrutiny and under very strict control. We did object to these hunters, private hunters being yeah. No, the deployment of private hunters to shoot Avni was a big mistake. And there were several legal issues connected to that. But the fact remains that you sometimes need to address this human wildlife conflict and take a drastic step to individual.
Yeah.
God.
Yeah, it's okay, sir. It's every time I let you know you're audible. So let's go.
I'm changing to another connection. That's why I had two connections back up.
All right.
Is it better now?
Yes,
Is it better now?
It's much better.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know for how long. So so we need to take those decisions.
Yes.
And it is not anti-wildlife. It will have to be taken. Otherwise, the threat is that mobs and kill animals and set fire to forests. Mobs destroy forest infrastructure. They attack and target guards and frontline staff of the forest department to settle scores. So it's a very, very serious situation. So many urban activists may not be aware of the ground realities, and therefore we need to take those decisions. So to conclude, hunting, there's no term called poaching. Hunting is absolutely illegal across the country. Nobody can even attempt to hunting.
Sorry, sir.
Okay, so that's the point. So attempt to hunt is also hunting.
Hunting. So again, the key takeaway of this is that not just hunting is the term given in the law, and that even attempt to hunting is illegal under the Wildlife Protection Act 1972. Now, based on this point, so earlier you had mentioned illegal trades and wildlife crimes, and you were talking about how this is quite common in such reserve areas. So, sir, what would you recommend are the steps for authorities to take to improve wildlife investigation in India?
Yeah. So, as I said earlier, correct, that if we can't prevent hunting, we need to detect cases of hunting, investigate them properly, and ensure that the culprits are prosecuted. Now, the Act has an elaborate procedure prescribed for prosecution of offenders. There are, as I said earlier, both police and forest department officers are empowered to stop, search, arrest, and detect cases of hunting. And this could be a direct killing of the animal or trade in its body parts. A freshly killed animal is defined under the Wildlife Act as an uncured trophy. A processed head of a tiger, probably, or a skin, is called as a trophy. There are all these designated terms, defined terms in the law. So whether a person has just hunted an animal and is transporting it, or has been caught in the act of hunting, or somebody has displayed a trophy, a tiger head or a tiger skin or a leopard skin or whatever it is. All this comes within the ambit of wildlife crime, and officers of forest department and police can investigate, arrest the person, and if they are found to be in illegal possession of those trophies, some old trophies that probably 2 generations ago somebody had acquired, and at the time of the Wildlife Protection Act, when it came into force in 1972, everybody had to make a declaration. And if that declaration had been made and a proper license or permit had been obtained from the chief wildlife warden, that's a legal trophy. But that cannot be displayed in public or in a commercial enterprise. In any commercial place, it cannot be displayed. You can keep it in your house. So that is different. But if you don't have that license and you have not made a declaration, and if you come into possession of any such trophy or animal, for example, in a village, an elephant may come and fall dead due to some natural reason, or something else can die. It becomes the duty of every person to report such an event within 48 hours to the nearest forest officer or the nearest police station. And sometimes what happens, without any criminal intent, people will find that there are 2 leopard cubs. Actually, what happens is that the mother would have left the cubs and gone out to hunt. People think that the cub is abandoned. And out of compassion, without any evil motive, they pick up the cubs, bring it home, start feeding it milk, and so forth. Technically, that is also an offense. So the mere possession is an offense. So therefore, there is a procedure. So what happens is that empowered officers can investigate just like any other crime. They can arrest a person, or they can summon the person. They can summon witnesses. And at the end of the investigation, they have to produce an arrested person, like in criminal law, there are strict conditions. Within 24 hours, the person has to be produced before a jurisdictional magistrate, and the magistrate can either remand the person to forest or police custody or to judicial custody or enlarge the person on bail. All three can happen. But when the person is enlarged on bail, the case doesn't go away. The investigation has to be completed. Sometimes you find open and shut cases where investigation can be completed within 24 hours. But in many cases, it doesn't. So there is a 6-month time period within which the investigation has to be completed. And at the end of the investigation, a complaint has to be filed before the court with all the evidence that has been collected, witness statement, statement of the accused, all this, and forensic evidence, DNA evidence, which is forensic evidence. If a weapon is used, ballistic reports or toxicology reports, all these are collated and presented as a complaint. In police parlance, normally people refer it to as a charge sheet or a challan. There is no system of charge sheet or challan in case of offenses under the Wildlife Protection Act. These are called as complaint cases. I do not want to go into the technicality of it because it's a non-technical audience. So a complaint is filed and the magistrate takes cognizance of the complaint. If after applying his judicial mind, he feels that it is a valid complaint. If it is a bogus case, the magistrate has all the powers to dismiss it, because sometimes bogus cases are filed to harass people. This happens in every sphere of life. But otherwise, the magistrate takes cognizance and sets the law in motion. There will be a trial. And at the end of the trial, there are two types of trials. Let me just illustrate it in very simple terms. There is what is called as a warrant case for cases involving 3 to 7 years punishment, imprisonment. And there's a simpler summons case where the trial is simpler. The number of steps is minimized. And therefore, I don't want to go into the technical details of it. Therefore, at the end of this trial, the magistrate will determine whether the person is guilty or is not guilty. So if he is guilty, he is convicted and sentenced to imprisonment, and a fine is also imposed. So this is the way you need to, from the time a crime is detected till the person is convicted, you need to go through all these steps carefully as prescribed, because a lot of cases in this country get dismissed on technicalities because of procedural errors. And let me emphasize here, I think I mentioned it to you at the start of this program, the Wildlife Protection Act has a stringent punishment. 3 to 7 years is very, very stringent punishment. 7 years is a lot. There is nothing wrong with the law. Please don't be under the impression that we need stronger laws. Let me also tell you, because I do a lot of program for judicial officers, a judge will not condemn a person to a very high level of imprisonment unless the quality of evidence and investigation is extremely high. And therefore cases are lost. It might sound a little like an oxymoron, but the point is that if the sentence is very high and the investigating agency has not done a good job, the chances of the person going scot-free is higher. But for 3 years, the magistrates are willing to convict people. So therefore, there's nothing wrong with the law. The problem lies with implementation.
So, sir, as you mentioned, from the point of detection till the whole court process goes on, how even investigation should ideally be completed in 6 months. I'm pretty sure that time is always like taken even after that. this has been a very important, this has been very important information for a lot of us, because if you actually see the way the arrest is also made is quite similar to how an arrest is made for many other cases. Your rights are still there. Your rights, for example, contacting the lawyer, contacting your family, etc., are all there. And this information is particularly important to understand how wildlife crimes are investigated. So moving on from here, sir, one of the main results of urbanization and development has been a sort of conflict of human-wildlife conflict, as you had repeatedly mentioned. You had even discussed it earlier before. So, sir, let me just ask you one question. For a lot of our users here who may face such a situation where they may come into contact with wildlife, what are the first steps that you recommend? Like, what do they do? And what do the authorities also do on the spot? You had mentioned earlier with some examples, but if you could just quickly take us through this, that would be great.
Yeah. So the first thing you must do is stay clear of that wild animal, because that is very important, because you never know how a cornered animal reacts. You cannot predict behavior because it's under immense stress. So please maintain distance. Don't try, and you never know how fast an elephant moves. It'll be on you within seconds. You will not know. And you never know how high a leopard can leap. So it'll be on you in no time. So please stay clear of the wild animal. Call the local ranger. Don't form mobs and try to chase the animal or harass it or whatever. If possible, if it has entered a house, and if you can move people out of the house, lock the house, the authorities will come and deal with it.
Yes.
These are some simple steps. Crowd control for the enforcement officers. The first thing is, if people can on their own cooperate, not form into mobs, shout, pull out cameras, flash, go near the animal, etc., create chaos, half the problem is resolved. But if crowds cannot be managed and they're going berserk, the police will have to come in and do crowd control, because most deaths happen in such situations. And the forest department or the veterinarian who has been deployed to capture the animal cannot work. And and a tranquilizer dart is not a bullet. It can't go through vegetation. And even assuming that you're targeting a tiger or a leopard and you're trying to tranquilize it, you need to hit the muscular shoulder, upper shoulder of the tiger, or the upper portion of its hind legs. You can't shoot anywhere and everywhere. And wind resistance, so many things affect the movement of the dart. So it is not a, in quotes, magic bullet that can be fired and the animal can be brought down. So please cooperate with the authorities. Please do not rush to the animal or throw stones at it or fire crackers, because 2-3 groups can start bursting crackers from 2-3 different directions and the animal will run amok. And believe me, the animal is more scared than you are. It is cornered and it is extremely scared and stressed. So give it space and inform the authorities. Do not form mobs. You can yourself, village leaders or any community leader can instruct people, even if it's in a crowded town. You can form, you volunteers can take charge, tell the people not to chase the animal or whatever and create a havoc. If this is done, then the trained veterinarians, of course, there is a gap. There are not many trained veterinarians. There is shortage of tranquilizer darts. There's shortage of equipment and so forth. And the forest department must be better equipped with rescue kits. For example, nets are important, ropes are important. Sometimes leopards go and fall in wells, so they need to be removed. So these are all very sensitive, careful operations that have to be done very carefully. And in the glare of the mob with 1,000 people shouting and screaming, it cannot be done. So therefore, people can cooperate in this manner, and to a large extent, the situation can be diffused. The animal can be safely trapped and taken away.
So the key takeaway here is that people should definitely not agitate the animal in any way, and definitely call up the authorities who would come and help on the point. And keeping that in mind, let's go to our final.
Sorry, one point.
Yes.
Please don't take law into your hands and kill the animal.
Yes.
You will be prosecuted. Yes. It amounts to hunting. Please do not take law into your hands. Allow the authorities to function and take care of the situation.
So on that point, let's go to a very important subject, which many of our users might also be. Specifically, sir, how can, from your experience, how can activists and civil society organizations, volunteers who want to get into this field, basically take part in wildlife conservation and contribute to protection of such habitats?
Very good point, because we need a lot of people to support this cause. We need informed people. So the first thing which I want to convey to your audience is that you must be aware that the Constitution of India empowers every citizen with wide-ranging fundamental rights: right to freedom of speech, expression, right to form a society, a right to get involved in public affairs, etc. So you are fully empowered to participate in this process of conservation, debate in society, healthy debates, not inciting violence. You can insist that officials hear you out on either on policy or on a grievance that you may have, or on a specific aspect which concerns a national park or sanctuary, or any other issue. So you have wide-ranging rights. You also have fundamental duty under Article 51 AG to protect forests, rivers, lakes, and wildlife. So these constitutional provisions empower citizens and activists to participate in such public issues of conservation. And these are extremely important. The next aspect is that these are complex issues. So I would suggest that young conservationists, interested individuals, must try to look and align themselves or volunteer for an NGO which is doing good work. Because you need to be, I do a lot of programs for conservationists. I did about 6 webinars during the COVID lockdown. The point is that there is a lot to learn. And it's a lifetime's learning. Just like investigation can't be taught in a refresher course, conservation can't be taught in a webinar. It's a lifetime's learning, and still you make mistakes. So therefore, it's important for youngsters and interested people to align with an experienced NGO or an experienced individual, try to learn what is conservation. And the next point which I want to convey is that there are many professionals. You may be an IT professional, you may be a journalist, you may be a lawyer. These people can contribute in a major way to strengthen conservation efforts. For example, lawyers. Many lawyers do pro bono work, and they take up the case of an individual in public interest, and they don't charge a fee. That's a huge contribution to wildlife conservation. I have worked with many lawyers who are, I can even mention his name, a senior counsel by name Sham Diwan has been appearing for us in a very, very major case, and he has not charged 1 rupee. Otherwise, you know what the fees are, professional fees are. So lawyers can make a huge PK Manohar of legal action for wildlife and environment. They're doing yeoman service. So If you're a lawyer, you can contribute. If you are a writer, you can contribute, because there's a lot of information that needs to be disseminated to the public. Though there's a glut of information, we are in this era of false news, electronic media, social media, a lot of things circulate. People don't know what is authentic, what is correct, not correct. So if good writers can greatly contribute. So that's another thing. There are other people with other skills. There are people who are extremely good talking to political leaders. And let me tell you that if you really go and invest time and talk to political leaders, they really understand the issues. Please don't be under the impression that they don't understand issues. They really and they can intervene, and intervene very decisively. And we have seen a lot of success talking to good leaders who understand these issues. So there are people who have that skill. For example, some people, some scientists we found in one campaign could not even enter the Vidhan Sabha. He was stopped by the constable on duty. So there are others who can get through these things. So there are many things. These are all skills. Speaking, public speaking. This is another skill. You need to learn about it. Interacting with bureaucracy. This is another skill. Some people are interested in doing RTIs. That's a skill that you develop over a period of time. So this is not about just emotional breastbeating. Conservation today has changed. You need to, it's an amalgamation of several different skills. And to illustrate it with a simple analogy, it's like a cricket team. You need a fast bowler, you need a spinner, you need a wicket keeper, you need specialist batsmen, etc. So it's not singles tennis. It is a team game, and you must get involved, because one individual may not have all the skills required. And one more thing, if you can spare time, conservation sometimes, particularly site-based conservation, a lot changes in a few hours sometimes. What you discuss at breakfast may not be the situation at dinner time. Things would have changed. So if you say that, oh, I have only time on Sunday to do something, yes, you can do something. I'm not saying you can't. But then if you really want to be an activist, you may have to invest much, much more time and run with the ball if you want to do conservation. But please be aware, you should not lose hope. Don't become despondent. There are solutions, and you need to find the right people, and you certainly can intervene, because the Constitution, as I said, has given you wide-ranging powers, but don't misuse it. Because just because you have right to freedom of speech, don't make a defamatory speech or use abusive language in your letters to authorities. So these are safeguards. Don't incite violence, but otherwise you can do pretty much. You can question government policy, you can challenge government policy in court. And last point, many people won't know, you can challenge a law in court. You can approach the Supreme Court or the state high courts and challenge a law and say the Wildlife Protection Act must be scrapped. So this is the kind of power that you have in your hands. Use it carefully, use it with knowledge, and use it purposefully to save wildlife. I'm sure you can succeed and you can contribute to wildlife conservation. Thank you.
I think, sir, we actually got a comment on the same question, but you've answered it. The question was, what role can a person who has never been involved in the wildlife sector do to protect wildlife? I mean, sir, apart from the points you mentioned, is there anything you would like to mention specifically to this? I mean, you have covered most of it, though.
Yeah, in the sense that, see, there are aspects that you can do in terms of avoiding. See, one thing which people think, oh, I'm going to a national park, I'm going on a safari. That is not conservation. In fact, you may be adding to the problem, because you see Corbett or you see Ranthambore or any of these reserves, there are 20, 30 jeeps surrounding a tiger. And conservation is not just about tigers or just charismatic animals. So one thing you can do is be aware, and wherever you can make a comment quietly, sitting in your office, sitting at home, each voice counts. You could contribute by adding to a campaign, signing on. To a certain extent, you can contribute in that manner. And you, if people in your family are in positions of power, you can quietly influence them. You can quietly educate them in the background, outside media glare. So there are many ways you can. Your father could be a judge, your father or mother or whoever could be a police officer, who could be some in a position of power. So you could harness or channelize your interest by trying to get them interested in wildlife, trying to share with them some of the important things that you have learned. And in that way, you can contribute to conservation.
I think that's a very fitting answer for our user who's asked this question. And so let's just end with one more user question, because we've gone a little ahead out of time. So that question is, what resources do you recommend for people who want to get into wildlife conservation? I think they're looking for resources to read, maybe. Yeah.
Please visit a portal called conservationindia.org. Conservation India is one word. It's an excellent portal. I'm also associated with that. I contribute material. It has been started by two great individuals called Shekhar Dattatri, who's an excellent internationally known wildlife filmmaker and a conservationist, a colleague of mine on the national board earlier, and Ramki Srinivasan, an professional who put a very lucrative and set up this portal.
Just 5 seconds.
Yeah. Ramki Srinivasan, an IT professional, and Shekhar Dattatri, they've put in a lot of resources, time and effort. Excellent portal, very, very well curated information is available, including how to start, how to become a conservationist, what is the science of conservation. There is, and even law, I have contributed a lot of on law and policy. And please, that's a very good resource for you. Other than that, you can look at good pieces that are published in some of the good journals, like Mongabay does publish some good material. So you can get a lot of material, and you could find books and try to learn about these things. In fact, Conservation India will give you links to a lot of scientific papers, a lot of reports, a lot of good advice on many aspects. So I would strongly recommend that portal.
All right, sir. Okay, I think that has answered our question. And sir, could you turn your video back on since we're concluding? Yeah. All right. And first of all, I would like to thank you, sir, for coming and giving such a comprehensive understanding of wildlife law. Like, there have been a lot of key takeaways, and frankly, your experience in the field is an eye-opener, and webinars such as this and all those that you've participated in are very, very important for wildlife conservation itself. Social media is also playing a big role in the way we look at certain issues. Again, thank you so much, sir, for taking out your valuable time and joining all of us. I'm sure our audience is also very happy.
My pleasure, and I hope it was of some use to your audience.
Yes,
thanks,
sir. Like, it was all good.
Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Okay.